In this video, we will be going over Jeppesen's General Oral Test Guide. Note, the DME will expect you to use your own words, so please study accordingly. Chapter 1, Mathematics. Describe the result of adding a large positive number and a smaller negative number. The result is a smaller positive number and is the same as ignoring the signs and subtracting the smaller number from the larger. How do you convert a fraction into a decimal? Divide the top number, numerator, by the bottom number, denominator. What is the key step that must be performed in order to add or subtract unlike fractions? You must find the lowest or least common denominator. How do you divide one fraction by another? You invert the divisor and multiply the numerators together and the denominators together. How can you convert a decimal into a percent? Multiply the decimal by 100 and add a percent sign. How do you convert a fraction into a percent? Convert it to a decimal, move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and add the percent sign. How do you change a decimal into the nearest equivalent fraction? Multiply the decimal by the desired denominator. The result becomes the numerator in the fraction. What are two different ways that a ratio may be expressed? As a fraction, percent, or decimal. What is a proportion? A statement of equality between two or more ratios. What is meant by the root of a number? A root is two or more equal smaller numbers that, when multiplied together, equal the specified number. How do you find the square of a number? And please give an example. Multiply the number by itself. For example, 4 squared is 4 times 4, which equals 16. What is a common method of making computations involving a very large or very small numbers more manageable? Convert the numbers into scientific notation by using powers of 10. How is 100,000 expressed in a power of 10? 10 to the 5th power. What formula is used to find the area of a rectangle and a triangle? For a rectangle, area equals length times width. For a triangle, area equals 1/2 times base times height. Define pi. Pi is a constant that expresses the relationship between the circumference of a circle and its diameter and is approximately equal to 3.1416. Describe a trapezoid. A trapezoid is a closed four-sided figure having two parallel sides and two sides that are not parallel. What is the formula for computing the area of a circle? Pi r squared. Chapter 2, Physics. Define matter. Any substance that occupies space and has mass. Matter may exist in what three states? Solid, liquid, gas. Define kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. Work is the product of what two factors? Force and distance moved. What are the parts of a lever? A rigid bar and a pivot point called the fulcrum. A wheelbarrow is an example of what class of lever? Second class lever. Are all three states of matter affected by thermal expansion, and if so, which state is affected the most? Yes, all three states are affected, with gases being affected the most. What is a British thermal unit, otherwise known as a BTU? It is the amount of heat energy required to change the temperature of 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. Name the three methods of heat transfer. Convection, conduction, and radiation. Can liquids be compressed? No. What are the customary units used to express hydraulic or pneumatic pressure in the United States? PSI, pounds per square inch. Describe how pressure is transmitted when a force is applied to a confined liquid. The pressure is transmitted equally in all directions. What formula expresses the relationship between the force, pressure, and gas? Force equals area times pressure, F equals A times P. What is the approximate speed of sound at sea level on a standard day? 761 miles an hour, 661 knots, or 340 meters per second. What is the atmospheric pressure at sea level on a standard day? 29.92 inches of mercury. What is the temperature on a standard day at sea level? 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius. What are the factors that determine density altitude? Temperature and atmospheric pressure. What is the term used to describe the ratio between the amount of moisture actually present in the atmosphere as compared to the amount of air could hold if it were completely saturated? Relative humidity. What are the four principal forces acting on an airplane in flight? Lift, drag, thrust, gravity. What is the term that describes the angle between the relative wind and the chord line of an airfoil? The angle of attack. What are the factors that cause an airplane wing to stall? Stall is caused when the angle of attack exceeds a critical value and the airflow separates from the upper surface and becomes turbulent. What are the principal effects that result from lowering the flaps while in flight? The lift increases, the drag increases, and the stall speed decreases. What is the function of a wing-mounted vortex generator? Vortex generators delay or keep the airflow from separating from the upper surface of a wing during high-speed flight. How does blade flapping help to compensate for dissymmetry of lift in a helicopter main rotor system? Flapping increases the angle of attack and lift on the retreating blade and decreases the angle of attack and lift on the advancing blade. How does the airflow through the main rotor of a helicopter change during the transition from normal flight to auto rotation? During normal flight, the air moves downward, and during auto rotation, the air moves upward. What is friction? The opposition to relative motion between two objects in contact with each other. Chapter 3: Basic Electricity. 1 kilowatt is equal to how many watts? 1000 watts. What law describes the most fundamental or basic relationships in an electrical circuit? Ohm's law. What are the three main elements of Ohm's law? Voltage, current, resistance. How would you write Ohm's law as an equation? E equals I times R. If the resistance in a DC circuit remains the same but the voltage doubles, what happens to the amount of current flowing in the circuit? It also doubles. In DC circuits, what unit measures power? Watts. What three elements are required to form an electrical circuit? A source of electrical energy, a load or resistance to use the electricity, and wires or conductors to connect the source to the load. DC circuits can take one of three forms or types. What are they? Series, parallel, or series parallel, otherwise known as complex. A 24-volt lead-acid battery has how many cells? 12. A fully charged lead-acid battery has a specific gravity that varies between what two values? (1.275) and 1.3. You must apply a correction to the specific gravity reading of the electrolyte of a lead-acid battery when the temperature is outside of what two values? Whenever the temperature is less than 70 or more than 90. What is the reason for having separate facilities for storing and servicing nickel cadmium and lead-acid batteries? The electrolyte in the two types of batteries is chemically opposite, and the fumes from one type can contaminate the electrolyte in the other type. The state of charge of a nickel-cadmium battery cannot be determined by measuring the specific gravity of the electrolyte. For what reason? There is no significant change in the specific gravity of the electrolyte as the battery is charged or discharged. What is the principal advantage of AC current over DC current? Power can be transmitted over long distances more efficiently and with smaller wires because the voltage can be easily increased or decreased by means of transformer. What are the three causes of opposition to current flow in an AC circuit? Resistance, inductive reactance, and capacitive reactance. Define inductance. An induced voltage which is opposite in direction to the applied voltage. What component creates capacitance in the AC circuits? A capacitor. How does a capacitor store electricity? The energy is stored in the form of an electrolytic charge or field that exists between two conductors separated by an insulator. What property of an AC circuit is defined by the term impedance? The total opposition to current flow. What are two reasons that might cause a nickel-cadmium battery to fail to deliver its rated capacity? Faulty cells or cell imbalance. What electrical values are measured with a typical multimeter? Voltage, current, and resistance. Chapter 4, Electrical Generators and Motors. There are no FAA O&P test questions regarding electrical motors and generators. Chapter 5, Aircraft Drawings. How many views are required to represent the important detail of most aircraft parts? 1, 2, or 3 views are usually enough. What kinds of parts can be represented by one-view drawings? Parts with uniform thickness, such as shims, plates, and gaskets. What is a name for a part of a drawing used to bring out important details, and how is it drawn? A detailed view, which is usually drawn to a larger scale than the main drawing. What is the purpose of a schematic diagram? They are primarily used for troubleshooting systems. Describe an orthographic projection. It is a way of drawing an object using different views at right angles to each other, such as top, front, and side view. Why do manufacturers use the symbols on aircraft drawings? Symbols are a form of shorthand and are used to convey the characteristics of a component with a minimum of drawing. Describe the appearance of lines used to show hidden views, alternate positions, and the middle of symmetrical objects, and give their proper name. Hidden views are shown with hidden lines. which are short, evenly spaced dashes. Alternate positions are shown with phantom lines made up of light, alternating long dashes and two short dashes. Center lines consisting of alternating long and short dashes show the middle of symmetrical objects. How can you determine if a drawing has been changed? A record of the changes is listed either in the revision block or in ruled columns, which may be in the corner of the drawing or next to the title block. How are dimensions shown on aircraft drawings and what is their purpose? Dimension lines are usually solid and generally broken at the midpoints for insertion of the measurement. They provide a means to accurately represent the size of the object. What is the difference between allowance and tolerance? An allowance is the difference between the nominal dimension and the maximum and minimum permissible sizes. The tolerance is the difference between the extreme permissible dimensions, which may be found by adding the plus and minus allowances. What is meant by clearance when used on aircraft drawings? An allowable dimension between two parts. What kinds of information about an aircraft drawing can be found in the title block? The part or assembly name, drawing size, scale, date, company name or initials of the people responsible for creating or approving the drawing. What information is contained in a bill of materials? A list of materials and parts needed to fabricate or assemble a component or system shown in the drawing. Chapter 6: Weight and Balance. If an aircraft is loaded so that the aft CG limit is exceeded, what undesirable flight characteristics is likely to occur? The aircraft will be tail heavy and may be unable to recover from a stall or spin. If all the records for an aircraft are missing, how would you determine the empty weight and empty weight CG? The aircraft would have to be weighed and a new weight and balance record would have to be prepared. Define tare weight and describe how it is handled when weighing an aircraft. Tare weight is the weight of anything on the scales that is not part of the aircraft. It must be subtracted from the scale weight reading to determine the net weight of the airplane. If a piece of equipment such as a radio is added to an aircraft, how can you determine the effect on weight and balance without reweighing the aircraft? If the weight and balance records are up to date, a new weight and CG location can be determined by computation. Why is control of the weight and balance in an aircraft important? To provide for maximum safety, controllability, and stability in the aircraft. What is a datum of an aircraft and what is its function? The datum is an imaginary vertical plane at right angles to the longitudinal axis of the airplane. It is the reference point from which all horizontal measurements are taken. How do you determine the moment of an item of equipment? The weight of the item is multiplied by the arm, which is the distance between the item and the datum. What are two ways of determining the arm of an item or equipment? Measure the distance between the item and the datum or use data supplied by the manufacturer. What should be done to obtain a positive plus moment after the datum? Add weight. What should be done to obtain a negative minus moment after the datum? Remove weight. What should be done to obtain a positive plus moment forward of the datum? Remove weight. What should be done to obtain a negative minus moment forward of the datum? Add weight. How does the category of an airplane affect its loaded weight? Aircraft certified in more than one category, such as normal and aerobatic, may have two different maximum gross weights and different useful loads. As you prepare an aircraft for weighing, you determine that there is equipment on board that is not permanently installed and recorded on the equipment list. What should you do with this equipment? All equipment not permanently installed in the aircraft or included on the equipment list should be removed from the aircraft. Define the term residual fuel. Any fuel that remains in the tanks, lines, and engines after the system has been drained. Define the term residual oil. Any oil that remains in the tanks, lines, and engines after the system has been drained. How should you account for fuel when weighing an aircraft to determine weight and balance? Either drain the fuel system until only unusable fuel remains, or fill the tanks full and subtract out the weight of the usable fuel. Where are leveling instructions found, and describe one method of leveling an aircraft? Leveling instructions are found in the TCDS. An aircraft may be leveled by using a spear level at specified points, or an aircraft may be leveled by using a plumb bob from a designated point along with a leveling scale and protractor. Determine the term mean aerodynamic chord, otherwise known as MAC. Mean aerodynamic chord is the chord drawn through the center of the wing plan area. Describe the two most common ways of showing the CG location and/or CG range. In inches from the datum, or in percent of Mach. What is the purpose of an aircraft loading graph? It is a method for determining how to distribute the load so as to keep the CG within allowable limits. What is a ballast and why would you use it in an airplane? A ballast is a weight added to an airplane to bring its CG into the allowable or desired range. Installation of several new radios in the nose of an aircraft causes the forward CG limit to be exceeded. How can you correct this problem without removing the new equipment? Ballast may be installed in the tail to move the CG aft. How does the CG range of a helicopter compare to that of a fixed-wing airplane? Helicopters typically have a much smaller CG range. Chapter 7: Aircraft Structural Materials. How do you work harden a piece of metal? By cold working the metal. Describe the primary difference between a thermosetting and a thermoplastic resin. A thermosetting resin doesn't soften when heated and chars or burns rather than melting. Thermoplastic resins become soft and pliable when heated and harden when cooled. Explain how thermoplastic and thermosetting resins are commonly used in modern aircraft. Plexiglass is a thermoplastic resin commonly used for windshields and windows. Thermosetting resins are most often used as the matrix material in composite structures. Name one of the types of resin commonly used as a matrix material for aircraft composite laminates. Polyester resin or epoxy resin. What are some of the materials that are commonly used as the reinforcing component in a composite structure? Fiberglass, aramid or Kevlar, graphite or carbon fiber, linen, and paper. What are the reasons that alloy steel that is responsive to heat treatment is usually less suitable for welding? It may become brittle and lose its ductility in the area of the weld and lose its alloy characteristics. Give one advantage of prepreg materials other than saving time in construction or repair of composite components. One, prepreg fabrics contain the correct amount of matrix. 2. The matrix material is evenly and completely permeated to the reinforcing fibers. 3. The matrix has the resin and hardener in the correct proportion. Chapter 8: Aircraft Hardware. What is indicated by the markings on the heads of solid shank rivets? The material they are made out of, and indirectly, their strength. How can you keep heat-treated aluminum alloy rivets soft enough to install after the quenching process? If the rivets are stored in a freezer, they will remain soft for several days. What is the grip length of a bolt? The length of the unthreaded portion. In what way are AN standard steel bolts identified? By the code markings on the bolt head. What is the difference between a close tolerance bolt and a general purpose bolt? Close tolerance bolts are machined to more accurate dimensions. For what types of applications are self-locking nuts not allowed? Self-locking nuts may not be used when either the bolt or the nut is subject to rotation. If the maintenance procedures do not specify a torque value for a bolt or nut, how can you determine the proper values? Consult a standard torque table such as the ones found in AC 4313-1B. What is the most commonly used type of aircraft control cable? Extra flexible 7x19 stainless steel cable. Chapter 9, Hand Tools and Measuring Devices. What type of precision measuring instruments can be used to measure the outside dimensions of an aircraft part? Outside micrometers and vernier calipers. For what reasons should a micrometer be periodically calibrated? If dropped, its accuracy may be affected, or if the spindle is over-tightened, the frame may be sprung or bent, or continuously sliding objects between the anvil and the spindle may wear the surfaces. Chapter 10, Fluid Lines and Fittings. What are the two types of fluid lines commonly found in aircraft? Rigid metal lines and flexible hoses. Describe the method of classifying metal tube according to size. Metal tubing is sized according to wall thickness and outside diameter. Outside diameter is measured in 16th inch increments. When installing stainless steel tubing, what type of fitting should be used? Stainless steel fittings. What is the function of the sleeve on a flared tube fitting? The nut fits over the sleeve and draws the sleeve and the tubing flared tightly against the male fitting to form the seal. Describe the two types of flares commonly used on aircraft tubing. Single flare and double flare. How can you determine if a fitting is an AN type rather than an AC type? AN fittings have a shoulder between the flare cone and the end of the threads. AC fittings do not. What are the most significant differences between AN and AC fittings? Sleeve length, thread pitch, and the shoulder between the threads and the flare cone on AN fittings. What are the names of the parts of a flareless tube fitting? The nut and the sleeve or ferrule. How do you tell a flareless fitting from a flare type fitting? Flareless fittings don't have a flare cone and there is no space between the threads and the end of the fitting. What is the effect of over-tightening a flare type fitting? The sealing surface may be damaged or the flare cut off. In addition to being securely clamped, what is an additional requirement for installing metal fuel, oil, and hydraulic lines? The lines must be electrically bonded to the structure and be below electrical lines. What are some of the important advantages of Teflon tubing? It is compatible with nearly every liquid, has a broad operating temperature range, low resistance to fluid flow, and has a very long shelf life and service life. Describe the identification markings commonly found on flexible hoses. A ley line, identification such as mil-spec number, the manufacturer's name or symbol, the hose size, and a date code. How can you determine if a flexible hose has been correctly or incorrectly installed? The ley line will be straight if the hose is properly installed. A twisted ley line indicates an incorrectly installed tube. How are flexible hoses size designated? By the inside diameter measured in 1/16 of an inch increments. What precautions must be observed when deburring the end of a tube after it's cut? The wall thicknesses must not be reduced in size or fractured. Describe the operation of quick disconnect couplings. Each half has a valve that is held open when coupled and is spring-loaded closed when disconnected. If you fabricate a replacement for a flexible hose, what percentage of the total length must be added to allow for movement under pressure? 5 to 8%. What happens to the tube when a flareless fitting is over-tightened? The tube is weakened when the nut drives the cutting edge of the sleeve too deeply into the tube. Why are quick disconnect fittings used? To provide a quick means to connect or disconnect a fluid line without the loss of fluid or entrance of air into the system. Describe the steps involved in a dye penetrant inspection. The surface is cleaned and then penetrant is applied and allowed to dwell for a specified time. The penetrant is then removed with an emulsifier or cleaner. Once removed, the part is dried and then developer is applied. The results are then inspected and interpreted. Name some tools that are commonly used to assist in making visual inspections of welds. Magnifying glass, flashlight, mirror, and possibly a borescope. What are some of the non-destructive testing methods that may be used on aluminum parts? Visual, dye penetrant, eddy current, ultrasonic testing, and radiography. What process occurs during the preparation stage of a dye penetrant inspection when the penetrating liquid is applied and then removed from a cracked part? If a penetrant enters the crack by capillary action and remains there until made visible by the developer. A correctly made butt weld will have what bead width and how much penetration? The bead width should be 3 to 5 times the thickness of the base metal, and there must be 100% penetration. What is a telltale characteristic of a cold weld? cold weld has rough, irregular edges that are not feathered into the base metal and has variations in penetration amounts. The penetration of a fillet weld should be what percentage of the thickness of the base metal? 25 to 50%. Describe the basic steps for conducting a magnetic particle inspection. Magnetize the part, then coat the surface with ferromagnetic particles. If a defect or discontinuity is present, the particles will align with the discontinuity, forming a visible pattern. Chapter 12: Cleaning and Corrosion. Is there any requirement for cleaning an aircraft prior to an annual or 100-hour inspection? It is not only good common sense, but is a legal requirement as specified in FAR Part 43 Appendix D. Discuss the general precautions that should be observed when washing an airplane. Avoid or protect areas which may be damaged or contaminated, such as pitot and static ports, hinges, sealed areas, and bearings. What are some of the most common light-duty cleaning agents? Soap or detergents and water. What materials are commonly used as heavy-duty cleaners? Solvents and emulsions. What are the preferred cleaners for plastic surfaces such as windshields? Mild soap and water or a manufacturer-approved cleaner. What type of cleaning agents should be used to remove grease, oil, or fuel from aircraft tires? Soap and water. Give at least 3 examples of the factors that cause or influence corrosion. One, the environmental conditions. 2, the presence of dissimilar metals. 3, the type of metal. 4, the presence of electrolytes and or contaminants. 5, the condition of the protective coatings. Name at least 3 forms of corrosion. 1, surface. 2, intergranular. 3, filiform. 4, dissimilar metal or galvanic. 5, oxidation. 6, pitting. 7, stress. 8, fretting. Name at least 1 cause of filiform corrosion. One, improper or incomplete curing of a wash primer prior to painting. 2, failure to completely wash off acidic surface contamination. What are the visible signs of filiform corrosion? Blistered paint surfaces or worn or thread-like tracks or patterns under the paint. What are the 2 primary factors that may cause development of stress corrosion cracks? A corrosive environment and sustained tensile stress. What are the visible signs of fretting corrosion? The corrosion residue has a dark, smoky appearance and often appears around and streaming back from rivet heads. Why are piano-type hinges prime spots for corrosion? The steel pin and aluminum hinge material are dissimilar metals, and the hinge design tends to trap moisture and contaminants. What is the best way to protect piano hinges from corrosion? keep them clean and properly lubricated. Provide at least 4 examples of procedures used to prevent corrosion. Cleaning, lubrication, treatment, sealing, inspection, installing protective covers, keeping drain holes free and clear. Describe the tools that should be used to remove corrosion from anodized aluminum surfaces. Nylon scrubber pads such as Scotch-Brite, bristle brushes, aluminum wool, or aluminum wire brushes. Describe the effects of using steel brushes or steel wool to remove corrosion from aluminum surfaces. Steel brushes or steel wool must not be used to clean aluminum because steel particles can become embedded in the aluminum and cause corrosion. What is the purpose of allodyne? Allodyne is a chemical process that deposits a protective film or aluminum on aluminum alloys. This film improves corrosion resistance and paint adhesion. For what reason should you avoid cleaning anodized aluminum surfaces with aluminum metal polish? Aluminum metal polish should not be used on anodized aluminum surfaces because it will remove the anodized layer. Why should aircraft fabrics and plastics be cleared with recommended cleaners? Recommended cleaners cause the least amount of deterioration or damage. List at least 5 examples of areas in an aircraft that are prone to corrosion. One, battery compartments. 2, exhaust trail areas. 3, bilge areas. 4, vent areas. 5, landing gear and wheel wells. 6, fuel tanks. 7, wing flap recesses. 8, around and below galleys and lavatories. 9, piano hinges. 10, any area that could trap water or moisture. Chapter 13, ground handling and servicing. Name at least 3 possible hazards that may be encountered during typical ground operations, such as during engine run-up or taxiing. The possibility of fire, especially during engine starting, turning props or rotors, jet blast, other aircraft, vehicles, people, and obstacles, foreign objects such as rocks, gravel, rags, or loose hardware, high noise levels that might cause hearing damage, hydraulic lock in radial engines, or weather vaning of tailwheel type aircraft. What is the most generally used knot for tying down small aircraft? The bowline knot. Describe the precautions that should be taken to protect life and property while starting and running an aircraft engine. Study the procedures in the airplane flight manual. Be sure the propeller or inlet areas is clear and check for loose stones or gravel that could be sucked into the prop or engine. Also ensure the prop or jet blast doesn't blow into hangars or other airplanes and have a fire guard nearby. If an engine induction fire occurs while starting a reciprocating engine, what procedure should be followed to extinguish the fire? Continue cranking the engine to start it and suck the fire into the engine. If the engine doesn't start and the fire continues to burn, discontinue the start attempt and extinguish the fire with a suitable fire extinguisher. What safety procedures must be observed when hand propping a small aircraft engine? Become thoroughly trained, have a qualified person in the cockpit, check the brakes, call switch off before moving the prop, and make sure you have solid footing. When ready to start, call contact and listen for the reply. Swing the prop with the flat of your hand and move back from the prop arc. What procedure should be followed prior to starting a large radial engine to detect or prevent hydraulic lock in the cylinders? Pull the propeller through by hand for 3 or 4 complete revolutions. Resistance to the prop turning indicates a possible hydraulic lock in at least one of the cylinders. What is the cause of hydraulic lock in large radial engines? Oil seeps by the piston rings and accumulates in the combustion chamber of lower cylinders. When a piston comes up from its compression stroke, the incompressible liquid seizes it. What is meant by the term hot start when starting a jet engine? Ignition occurs with an excessively rich mixture, leading to a rapid temperature rise that can exceed the exhaust gas temperature limit. When towing an aircraft, should you use the tow vehicle or aircraft brakes to stop the aircraft? The tow vehicle brakes should be used except in an emergency. Then the aircraft brakes may be used. Why should an aircraft technician become familiar with the standard light signals? Light signals may be used when taxiing an airplane without a radio or when a radio becomes inop on a tower-controlled airport. If a mixture of avgas and jet fuel is used in a recip engine, what are the possible results? Avgas contaminated by jet fuel must not be used in piston engines. The engine may be damaged or destroyed. What does the number 100 signify in 100 LL aviation gasoline? It refers to the lean mixture performance number or octane rating of the fuel. Is it permissible to use avgas in a turbine engine? Limited operation may be allowed by the manufacturer. Continued use may reduce efficiency due to lead deposits on the turbine blades. What are some of the possible outcomes of using a lower grade of avgas than the specified grade? An increased chance of engine damage due to detonation, loss of engine power, and an increased probability of overheating. Part 23.973 of the FAA regulations specifies that certain markings must be placed adjacent to the fuel filler opening. What markings are used for recip engines? The filler openings must be marked with the fuel grade and the word avgas. Describe the important precautions that should be observed when fueling an aircraft. Be certain you are using the correct fuel, properly ground the aircraft and refueling unit, and protect the aircraft surfaces from hose and nozzle damage. The marking requirements for oil tank filler openings are specified in FAR 23.1157. What markings are required for a piston engine powered airplane? The word oil and the permissible grades and/or types, or a reference to the appropriate airplane flight manual for permissible grades and/or types of oil. Where can the standard aircraft taxi hand signals be found? In the AIM, Aeronautical Information Manual. Under what conditions should a recip engine be pre-oiled? Prior to starting a new or rebuilt engine, or one that has been preserved for storage. This ensures adequate lubrication on initial startup. Under what conditions may automobile gasoline be used in an aircraft engine? Only if approved by the FAA, usually by the issuance of a STC. What are the indications of water in aircraft fuel after draining a sample from the fuel sumps? The sample may have a cloudy or hazy appearance or a solid slug of water. What federal aviation regulation prescribes the requirements for issuance of a type certificate? FAR Part 21. What part of the FARs describes the airworthiness standards for transport category airplanes? FAR Part 25. What part of the FARs describe the performance characteristics that a small aircraft must demonstrate in order to be airworthy? FAR Part 23. Who is responsible for ensuring that only the most current information is used when performing maintenance on an aircraft? The person performing the maintenance. Why are ADs or airworthiness directives issued? To correct unsafe conditions found in aircraft, engines, propellers, or appliances. How does the FAA notify aircraft owners of unsafe conditions that must be corrected? By issuing airworthiness directives. How do you determine the time frame within which AD compliance is required? The AD contains the compliance time or period for completing the corrective action. If a mechanic wishes to develop a checklist for an annual or 100-hour inspection, what publication contains the guidelines for the required inspection items? FAR Part 43, Appendix D contains the scope and details of an inspection checklist. How can you determine if the repair of damage is a major or minor repair? FAR Part 43, Appendix A defines major and minor repairs as well as preventative maintenance. What publication will you consult for guidance when maintaining an old aircraft for which no maintenance manual exists? AC 4313-1B. What are advisory circulars? Non-regulatory information of interest to the aviation public. What publication would you consult to determine an aircraft or engines or propellers type design and its limitations? The type certificate data sheet and or aircraft specifications. In what FAA publication can you find a list of engines approved for use in a specific make and model of airplane? In the TCDS or aircraft specifications. What reference material can be used to determine if an aircraft is certified in more than one category? The TCDS. What is the name of the manual that the manufacturer provides to technicians who normally perform work on the systems and components of the aircraft? The Aircraft Maintenance Manual. Under what circumstances is compliance with a manufacturer's service bulletin mandatory? When the service bulletin is incorporated into an AD or other approved data. What kinds of publications are used by aircraft manufacturers to notify the owners of design defects and product improvements? Service bulletins, service letters, and service instructions. If you need to determine the serviceable dimensional limits for an engine part, what publication would you consult? The current engine manufacturer's overhaul manual. How often is the summary of ADs published? Every 2 years. As a certified mechanic, will you automatically receive all ADs? No. ADs are automatically sent only to registered aircraft owners. How are AD updates issued to subscribers to the summary of airworthiness directives? Through bi-weekly supplements. Where do you find the minimum scope and detail requirements that a 100-hour inspection checklist must contain? FAR Part 43, Appendix D. Records of a major alteration must be made in what 2 places? The Aircraft Maintenance Records and FAA Form 337. When completion of FAA Form 337 is required, how many copies are normally prepared and what is their distribution? 2 signed copies. 1 is given to the aircraft owner and 1 is sent to the local FSDO within 48 hours of the approval or return to service. When an aircraft is sold, what do the regulations require regarding the disposition of records that contain the current status of airworthiness directives? The seller must transfer the records to the buyer at the time of sale. For what period of time must an aircraft owner maintain the records of a 100-hour inspection? until a work is superseded or for 1 year after the inspection. In what publication may a mechanic find an example of a maintenance record entry for a 100-hour inspection? FAR Part 43.11. Where should a 100-hour inspection be recorded? In the appropriate maintenance record for the airframe, powerplant, propeller, or appliance. What items must be entered into the aircraft records after maintenance is performed? 1. A description of the work performed and/or reference to acceptable data. 2. The date the work was completed. 3. The signature, certificate number, and type of certificate the person approving the aircraft for return to service. What person makes the final maintenance record entry after a 100-hour inspection is completed? The person approving the aircraft for return to service. What documents must be prepared when a required inspection is performed and defects are found which render the aircraft or engine unairworthy? The required maintenance entries must be made and a list of discrepancies and unairworthy items must be furnished to the owner. What maintenance record entries are required to contain the aircraft total time in service? Only records of inspection require the total time. What regulation authorizes a certified mechanic who holds an IA to approve or disapprove a major repair or alteration? FAR 65.95. Who has the authority to rebuild an aircraft engine and return the operating time to 0? Only the engine manufacturer or an overhaul facility approved by the manufacturer. Are there any circumstances when more than 2 copies of Form 337 are required, and if so, when? Yes. 3 copies are required when a fuel tank is installed in the passenger or baggage compartment. The 3rd copy must be kept aboard the aircraft. How do the regulations define time in service in regard to maintenance record entries? With respect to the maintenance entries, time in service begins when the aircraft leaves the surface of the earth until it touches it at the next point of landing. What are the penalties for making fraudulent or intentionally false entries in any required record or report? The applicable airman certificates can be suspended or revoked. What persons are authorized to make the required maintenance entry approving the return to service after a progressive inspection is performed at the location other than the aircraft's home base? An applicable certified mechanic, an appropriately rated repair station, or the aircraft manufacturer. What is the difference between the terms overhaul and rebuilding as they pertain to the aircraft engine maintenance records? Overhauled engines must be tested to approved or acceptable current standards and technical data. Rebuilt engines must be tested to the same tolerances and limits as a new engine. When performing an inspection required by FAR Part 91, what rotorcraft system must be inspected in accordance with the manufacturer's maintenance manual or instructions for continued airworthiness? The drive shafts or similar systems, the main rotor transmission, gearbox for obvious defects, the main rotor and center section, the auxiliary rotor on helicopters. How can you determine that an aircraft part or appliance you receive is serviceable? By an approval for return to service in the maintenance record for the part or appliance with a completed Form 337. Chapter 15: Mechanic Privileges and Limitations. What publication should a mechanic consult to determine if a repair is considered major or minor? FAR Part 43, Appendix A. Where in the FARs will you find their certification requirements for mechanics? FAR Part 65. What are the ratings issued under a mechanic's certificate? Airframe and powerplant. What types of work may a certified mechanic perform? A mechanic may perform or supervise maintenance, preventative maintenance, and/or alterations. Is a certified airframe mechanic allowed to perform maintenance on engines? No, not unless they are supervised by a certified powerplant mechanic. What are limitations to a mechanic's privileges with regard to propellers? A mechanic may not perform or supervise major repairs or major alterations to propellers. Is a mechanic allowed to repair or alter an aircraft instrument? No, mechanics may not perform any repairs or alterations on instruments. What are the requirements for recent experience in order to exercise the privileges of your mechanic's certificate or rating? You must have worked as a mechanic or technically supervised other mechanics for at least 6 months out of the past 24 months. What authority does a mechanic have regarding approval for return to service? A mechanic may approve an aircraft, airframe, engine, propeller, or appliance for return to service in accordance with the provisions of FAR Part 65. What are the privileges of an A&P mechanic regarding inspections? A mechanic may perform and approve for return to service an airframe or engine following a 100-hour inspection. What is the duration of a mechanic certificate? The certificate is valid until surrendered, suspended, or revoked. What are the privileges and limitations of an A&P mechanic regarding major repairs and alterations to airframes and engines and their approval for return to service? A&P mechanics may perform major repairs and alterations but may not approve them for return to service unless they hold an inspection authorization. In addition to performing maintenance, what other privileges are granted to a power plant mechanic? A power plant mechanic may perform a 100-hour inspection on an engine and approve the engine for return to service. When may a mechanic perform an annual inspection and return the aircraft to service? When the mechanic holds an inspection authorization. May a mechanic supervise an inspection or a portion of an inspection and then approve the aircraft for return to service? No, the mechanic approving the aircraft for return to service must actually perform the inspection. What is the duration of a temporary airman certificate? (120 days). If a mechanic certificate is revoked, how long must he or she wait before applying for a new certificate? (1 year unless the revocation order states otherwise). What should a mechanic do if his or her temporary certificate is about to expire? Contact their local FSDO and seek for assistance. Is a person with a private pilot certificate allowed to perform maintenance, and if so, what are his or her limitations? A pilot may perform preventative maintenance in accordance with FAR Part 43.3 and FAR Part 43.7 and Appendix A on an airplane owned by the pilot. He or she can also approve the aircraft for return to service following that maintenance. What are your requirements as an aircraft mechanic when you have a change of address? You must notify the FAA in writing within 30 days of any change to your permanent address. This concludes Jeppesen's General Oral Study Guide.